Scott, welcome back to beautiful Oklahoma.
That's right. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Good to be with you, Fred.
Glad to have you, and
Yeah.
glad you're willing to take the time. I know a lot of our members are very anxious to hear about the things that are going on at the EPA, and they're universally happy that you are there.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind since actually December 7th, going through the confirmation process and then sworn in February 17th. But we've been hard at it since that time, and as you've seen. With the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the United States, a host of rules, the methane rule, all those things are being addressed to deal with the overreach of the past administration. So I think it's been a little bit over 50 days, Fred, since we've been there, and we've been earnest in trying to make sure that we get things fixed.
Well, I know one of the things that you've talked about in the past is restoring the EPA to its core mission. Why don't you describe what you believe the core mission of the EPA is and what you're going to try to do?
You know, it's very important because as you look over the last several years, the EPA has evolved to an agency that's kind of the first stop, exerting its authority in areas that I don't think Congress ever intended. If you go back to the very beginning, when the EPA was created in the early 1970s, by Republicans, by the way, and then you had Congress create the Clean Air Act, write the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, they were very intentional about making sure that states were active partners with the federal government in water quality and air quality. It's just the last several years where the past administration said, no, the EPA is the ultimate arbiter of that. States and their role had been pushed aside. And so getting back to that core mission of what we know as cooperative federalism, and knowing that people here care about the water they drink and the air that they breathe, and making sure that we're working together as opposed to as adversaries, I think is absolutely key. But also looking at those core missions of the agency, you know, Superfund sites across the country, over 1,300 Superfund sites where we've had land waste, some dating back to World War II era. We've had this national priority list, as you know, Fred, where sites are listed across the country. Some of those sites have been on the list for 30 to 40 years. Mm-hmm. That didn't sound like much of a priority to me, and I think the EPA has kind of lost its focus there. Air attainment, you know, what the agency's done the last several years with air attainment is opposed to trying to help states attain attainment in key areas, ozone, SOx, NOx, and the rest. They keep ratcheting down the levels, creating more non-attainment across the country. There's like 40% of the country in non-attainment right now. About 122 to 140 million people live in non-attainment areas. The focus of the agency should be getting those 122 to 140 million people in in attainment, so we can see jobs grow and people enjoy those areas of the country. So getting back to attainment, cooperation, partnership, federalism with states, and those core missions of air, land, and water. Sounds a little bit like the Department of Defense, but air, land, and water, ensuring that we have good outcomes is something that we're focused upon.
Okay. Now, I understand the Trump administration has talked a little bit about cutting the budget, and Congress has talked about cutting the budget for the EPA. Do you think you'll still be able to do getting it back to its core mission and performing the essential mission of the organization?
Well, we know this from a state level at times, but for those in Washington, D.C., they think there's no room to cut whatsoever. When you're paying for gym memberships in Nevada to the tune of almost $15,000 or whatever it was for EPA employees, that shows you that there's room for cutting. You know, I think when you start relying upon and partnering with the states in the way that you should, they're using their resources, using their expertise. We have agencies at the state level, as you know, OWRB, DEQ, that are active partners, always have been with the EPA. So getting back to that core relationship, Fred, is going to help, I think, us do with less in Washington, D.C. We also have 10 regions across the country, and there needs to be some restructuring. About half our workforce is in D.C., about half the workforce is in these regions across the country. We have 15,000 total. So restructuring is going to impact that some. So we've got room to become more efficient. The core mission needs to be served, and that's one of the things I would say to you, is that there are air quality issues, there are water quality issues across state line. We've seen that in Oklahoma. With the Illinois River, you know, there have been long concerns about phosphorus levels, as you know, that are being impacting the river upstream in Missouri and Arkansas. There are air quality issues, activity in Dallas and Texas impacting attainment in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And so we've got to make sure that the EPA is performing its basic functions and its core mission. But I think it's gone well beyond that, and I think the budget reflects that.
You know, speaking of the phosphorus levels, you might talk a little bit, you're one of the few people I know that has actually gone through the confirmation process. How was it?
Well, I don't recommend it for your health.
Well, you know, but one of the interesting things was that a number of Democrats who had worked with you when you were Attorney General spoke highly of you on the confirmation process.
Yeah, it was kind. I mean, Dustin McDaniel, who was Attorney General in Arkansas, a Democrat there, he and I worked together very closely in trying to get an agreement between Arkansas and Oklahoma to address these phosphorus levels. It had never been done, as you know. It had taken decades to achieve that. We did that together, and now we have an enforceable limit on both sides of the border. I think, as I recall, 0.37. It's been a little while since I looked at that, but those 0.37 levels on the phosphorus is enforceable both on the Arkansas side as well as the Oklahoma side. Never been done, and so we worked hard in that process. And I think what the confirmation process reflected, it's political theater. You know, I spent a lot of time individually with those senators, going through. I met with probably 45 or so leading up to the actual hearing. In those individual meetings, there was great discussion, and I think great meeting the minds about ways that we can make the EPA get in its lane to achieve better outcomes and recognize the importance of the states in that partnership. But once the lights came on at the confirmation hearing, perhaps that wasn't as shared as much as it was privately.
Yeah, you know, the historic relationship between the states and local enforcement agencies on water and air quality has actually worked very well. I know in Oklahoma it worked very well until the last administration. Then it seemed to be sort of, we're going to tell you what to do at the state level, and you fought back against that. It sounds like you're trying to get back to that good relationship, that partner relationship, instead of we know everything in Washington.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that during that confirmation process, some of my critics loudly proclaimed that, you know, we'd sued the agency some 14 or so times. I think they actually undercounted, but in any event, those 14 or so times. And what I said to them during the process, privately and publicly, is that they deserved it. You know, when you have an agency that takes a statute, the Clean Water Act, and reimagines its authority to, you know, by redefining what a water of the United States is, to include a puddle and a dry creek bed in western Oklahoma, that something should be done about that. And the states stood in the way of that overreach, that reimagining of authority under the Clean Water Act, won the lawsuit. Now we've got to stay in the lawsuit, and now we're on the path to fixing that. So I think both are important. Regulatory, you know, humility, if you will. You know, a regulatory action should provide certainty to those that are regulated. And I know that's not terribly profound, but it is in light of the last administration. You know, those that are regulated in the finance sector and the healthcare sector and the energy and environmental space, they want to know what's expected of them so that they can plan and allocate resources. They want to make sure their voices are heard because they care about good outcomes as well. And when the past administration exerted itself in a way to cause uncertainty by doing things the statute didn't permit, that meant those in the industry quit doing what? Quit investing. You know, they created a paralysis.
That's exactly what I've been hearing from our members for a long time is, tell us what the ground rules are, keep the rules in place, and then we'll play by the rules. But the uncertainty was stifling investment in capital, operations, deployment of capital, all of those things. And you know, I think you're going to be pardon the pun, but a breath of fresh air.
Well, I mean, the greatest impediment, I think, to economic growth the last several years has been regulatory uncertainty, because people are going to put capital at risk if they don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now or 9 months from now. And so taking more of the longer view, you know, there's something we've actually talked about this at the EPA, regulatory pancaking, where the agency will come in and pass a rule or regulation maybe 2 years ago, and then 2 years later pass a rule in a different section of the Clean Air Act that undermines what they did 2 years prior. You know, so here's industry complying with that previous rule, investing capital, and then 2 years later saying, oh, don't do that anymore, and stranding all those investments. So we got to do a much better job as an agency at providing a longer view to industry, partnering with states, setting some clear objectives and metrics on what we want to achieve in air attainment. You know, as I've said, 40% of the country is in non-attainment right now. We ought to work to do better than that. Let's get up to 70% attainment across the country, whatever the percentage is, and let's measure it over the next 4 years, those 1,322 Superfund sites. Let's really get in and try to restructure the way we do those sites to see maybe hundreds of those come off, or on a path to remediation. So there's some really good work to be done at the EPA within our lane, and also partner with the states to achieve good outcomes at the state level.
Well, let's talk about a few of the specific programs. I think one of the really successful programs has been the Brownfields program.
Yes,
You might talk about what that is and what you see as the future of that program.
Well, the Brownfields program is very much like what we're doing with Superfund sites. You know, the EPA came into a site that maybe some land waste on a particular site, and they would come in and say, look, we're gonna get this into the hands of someone who wants to use the site on the back end, engage in some release of liability, provide them some certainty on that, get a much more truncated cleanup period, and then provide the property as a means of development post cleanup. I mean, the Skirvin Hotel is on a brownfield site, and so what you've seen in urban cities, urban markets across the country, is that, you know, where you've gone in and said, let's get this very valuable land, let's get some development going on by getting it cleaned up quicker, provide release liability, and then opportunity on the back end to engage in development. We're looking at the same thing on the Superfund sites, structuring it the same way.
Okay. There's also the Toxic Substance Control Act. I have to say I'm not familiar with that, so can you tell me?
You're blessed.
Tell me a little bit about that, and what are some of the past problems with that program?
Well, TSCA is a you know, for chemicals that enter into the stream of commerce, new chemicals, you know, pesticides, you know, in land application or otherwise, we have to actually approve the chemical almost like an FDA approach to say it's safe, you know, for use in the stream of commerce. There was a backlog of about 1,000 chemicals when I was sworn in. We're now down to about 600. You know, so we're trying to get that backlog addressed so that those in the marketplace can know we can use this chemical, we can, you know, engage in investment, and we can get certainty. And so there's a lot of resources being dedicated to that. Congress also amended the statute, you know, to provide for more uniformity in review. Before we had 50 state jurisdictions reviewing the chemicals. Now we have one at our shop, so that provides, again, more certainty to those in the marketplace. So there's several rules that are lined up to come out this year to provide answers to the market on each of those chemicals. So it's a very important function that we provide there.